1, 2. Ooh, that works. 1, 2, 1, 2. That's really loud too. So we'll lower it in there. 1, 2.
Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2.
Well, it's not bad. We were Friday, we had strange, for some reason, I think we cranked it. Yeah, well, because, people were just speaking from the audience. That's fine.
Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2.
You can abbreviate and short that. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Ooh, yep, Angela needs to mute. Are we good? All right. No more echo up here. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Jamie Fitch, the Sustainability Manager for the town of Scarborough. We're here this evening to learn more about the Spurwink Marsh Restoration Sawyer Street Removal Project. And so we're going to give you some information, some background for how this project came to be and the proposed path forward. Jake Amon from Wells Reserve is here to talk about marsh ecology and the impacts of sea level rise and culvert or road crossing restrictions, tidal restrictions on the marsh. So we'll start out this evening with presentation, and then we will open things up for questions and comments for those who are interested. Before we get going, we will introduce those of us sitting up here. So I'll start to my right.
Division Chief Gary Sandler and Deputy EMA Director for the town of Scarborough.
Good evening, everybody. Rich Kindle, and I'm the Fire Chief and Emergency Management Director for the town of Scarborough.
Jacob Amon, I'm the Stewardship Director at the Wells National Estuarine Research Reserve in Wells, Maine.
I am Angela Blanchett. I'm the town engineer here in Scarborough.
Hi, everyone. Peter Slavinsky. I'm a marine geologist with the Maine Geological Survey, and I'm here as a technical expert.
Thank you all. So I'm going to share my screen. We'll get going. For those who are joining us online on Zoom, once we get to the question and answer period, feel free to raise your hands and we'll unmute you, or you can put questions in the chat if that is more comfortable for you. So bear with me while I get this going, and fingers crossed that it works. Maybe. Oh, there we go. All right. So as I mentioned, we're here this evening to talk about the Spurwink Marsh Restoration and Sawyer Street Removal Project. Want to start off just kind of orienting you on the face of the land. I'm sure a lot of people are already familiar with this portion of town, but down here is Route 77. This is Sawyer Street, which becomes Sawyer Road in Cape Elizabeth. The town line is the culvert, which is right here. And this is the Spurwink River that extends inland into Scarborough and Cape Elizabeth. It does serve as the border for the two communities. Just to give you a brief overview of the project summary, the towns of Scarborough and Cape Elizabeth received a $1.59 million grant from the Maine Natural Resources Conservation Program. The grant is to remove 1,400 feet of the road from the marsh and restore or enhance approximately 62 acres of the Spurwink Marsh in the process. So I wanted to explain a little bit about how we got here. So this was a result of Cape Elizabeth's 2015 vulnerability assessment. They received a grant following the assessment to study the 16 most vulnerable culverts in Cape Elizabeth. So they started out with a habitat and culvert assessment. During this period, they also received additional funding specifically to study the Sawyer Street culvert because it was very vulnerable. It, as my counterpart in Cape Elizabeth says, it lit up red in their vulnerability assessment. And so they received additional funding to do a tidal crossing assessment for that culvert specifically. And so this report was generated in 2016. The analysis really focused on culvert replacement and not full removal and restoration. It was a modeling study that explored different culvert sizing based on various sea level rise scenarios. The study results of the study suggested that replacing the culvert to alleviate some of the flooding and help the marsh health would cost between $2.5 and $5 million, and the road would still flood through that process. And if we wanted to raise the road, in addition to installing a larger culvert or installing a bridge, we're looking more at the 10 million or more range. So a pretty expensive project for Little Sawyer Street. In 2022, we held a joint town council workshop with Cape Elizabeth and Scarborough to present the results of the culvert study. And during that workshop, town staff were directed to explore culvert removal, road removal. Knowing the level of investment that would be needed to create a more resilient crossing, and knowing that the road was still would still flood, the councils encouraged us to explore removal, which staff did. So we applied for a couple of different grants. I don't know why this is not advancing for me with the mouse. So I guess I will do that. So in 2023, the Maine Natural Resources Conservation Program approached the town of Cape Elizabeth and encouraged both towns to apply to their program for funding to not only design the project, but to implement it. So the funding sources that we were looking at previously would just be for design, and we would have to find additional funding in the future to implement whatever design was developed. And this opportunity came to us to do the design of the project and actually implement it. So we learned late 2023, early 2024 that the project was awarded. As I mentioned, it's $1.59 million. The towns were each required to contribute $185,000 for cash match, which I'll explain in just a moment. And in 2024, there was another joint town council workshop where we presented this opportunity to both councils, and both councils were enthusiastic about the project, and it was decided to move forward. And at subsequent meetings, both councils entered into a memorandum of understanding saying that we would work cooperatively to administer this project. So I wanted to just touch on a little bit what's going on out there on Sawyer Street, looking at the number of road closures since between 2020 and today. It's increased if you look at 2024. There were a lot of closures in 2024. So far, we've been fortunate in 2025 that we haven't had any closures. When our tide levels are predicted to get above 11 feet, that's when we start to see the tides come up to the edge of the road and start washing over the road. And we have several days coming up in October and November when the tides are predicted to be 11.5 to 11.7 feet. So we may have some closures coming up in 2025 due to astronomical high tides. So we know road flooding is not an uncommon occurrence in Scarborough, and knowing that we began our vulnerability assessment in 2024, we're just about wrapping it up. The vulnerability assessment evaluated coastal flood risk for Scarborough's areas and infrastructure. The roads were all ranked, went through a prioritization process where they were ranked based on flood risk and the consequences of flooding. So the consequences included the area impacted, the impact of public safety, damage potential, environmental impact, and economic impact. And the results of the vulnerability assessment are over 100 roads that are at risk of flooding by 2021. We currently have 38 at-risk roads, and by 2050, so in 25 years, that's expected to increase to 62 roads. The vulnerability assessment prioritized the top 30 roads in Scarborough that are at risk of coastal flooding, and Sawyer Street's on there, of course. The vulnerability assessment also looked at different flood scenarios that we may be faced with in the future. So this is flood scenario 1. This is our current astronomical high tide or coastal storm currently, and what high tide may look like in 2030. And Sawyer Street floods under these scenarios, under this scenario. Similarly, I'm showing flood scenario number 4. So this is a coastal storm today. This is actually flooding similar to what we saw during the January 13th, 2024 storm. And this may be what high tide looks like in 2021. Sorry, 2100. I do that every time. That's what high tide may look like in 2100. So as we know, Sawyer Street isn't the only road in Scarborough that floods. So Route 1, Route 9, Pine Point Road, Payne Road were all identified also in the vulnerability assessment. As we all know, these are highly traveled roads. They're evacuation routes. We also have Black Point Road, Pine Point area and the Higgins Beach area that are very vulnerable and need to be, work needs to be done there to address some flooding where possible. And we currently have Scotto Hill Road that is a vulnerable road and is currently closed because of a culvert failure. Our vulnerability assessment isn't the only study that we've completed recently that looks at road infrastructure needs. We also have our townwide transportation assessment that looked at all kind of Scarborough's entire transportation system. And we've got other needs on our inland roads as well. So if we look at Payne Road at the Nonsuch River crossing, this is essentially a bottleneck. The road, if you can, let's see, the mouse will work here. So if you look at the road above and below the culvert on Payne Road, it's much wider. It narrows in at Payne Road. And in order for us to address the capacity of that road and get traffic moving better through that road, this culvert needs to be increased because that's the pinch point. So again, another culvert replacement project that Scarborough needs to consider. And likewise, Gorham Road at the Nonsuch River, a similar bottleneck situation. And on this one, we have public pedestrian access and bicycle access concerns. It gets very narrow again through the culvert crossing on Gorham Road. In the street view picture, you can see there's almost no shoulder there. So we have done kind of a complete street application on Gorham Road where we've added sidewalks and bike lanes. Those had to stop at that culvert crossing because we didn't have the space within the road right of way because of that culvert to continue with that project at this point. So all of these projects have financial implications. So I mentioned earlier that the grant that was received was just under $6 million. The town's contribution, as I said, was $185,000. That money is directed towards constructing the turnarounds that would have to be built at the end of each dead end in Scarborough and in Cape Elizabeth. So looking at a total project cost of $1.96 million. But really the investment for each community is pretty low under this approach. I mentioned earlier the culvert replacement was $2.5 to $5 million. And the road is still going to flood. And then if we were to do a culvert replacement or a bridge, in addition to elevating the road, we're upwards of $10 million, excuse me. So with all of the infrastructure needs that we have in Scarborough, both for as identified as part of our vulnerability assessment and as part of our transportation study, we need to make some hard decisions. And so we are suggesting that we remove Sawyer Street, remove this vulnerable road so that we can invest in our other roads that also need attention. At this point, I will hand it over to Jake, who will go through his presentation to talk a little bit more about marsh health and how marshes are impacted by sea level rise and tidal restrictions.
Great. Thanks everybody for having me. I didn't have dinner yet and that pizza smell is driving me nuts. Is that being brought in? So again, my name is Jacob Amon. I'm the Stewardship Director at the Wells National Estuarine Research Reserve in Wells, Maine. And I've been providing technical support to the towns since 2016 or so on culverts in the community. So the marsh, Spurwink Marsh is included in the Scarborough Marsh focus area of statewide ecological significance because of the high quality habitats and the wildlife species and significant plant species that are found here. And it's a really unique place in the state. And it gets a lot of attention from environmental organizations, from natural resource conservation organizations, and justifiably so. Spurwink Marsh has been identified as a priority marsh for supporting the state endangered salt marsh sparrow, which is a bird that nests on the salt marsh and is expected potentially to be extinct within the next 25 to 30 years if habitat conservation isn't successful. So it's, from an environmental standpoint, it's a really important place. Scarborough Marsh is also the largest contiguous salt marsh in the state of Maine. And when you add Spurwink Marsh in there, it's really quite a significant resource. So here's a neat photo of Sawyer Street from around 1930. This aerial photograph was taken by the Portland Water District. And it's a really great look at what the landscape looked like back then. It's changed quite a bit, obviously. There's a lot less farmland around there now, though there's still fields that border the marsh, and obviously the forests have grown up quite a bit. You can see Sawyer Street and the crossing that existed at that time in the center of the photo. And a couple of things that I'll point out to you here, because we're going to see some current photos in just a minute. You can see the telltale signs of the culvert causing erosion in the channel. That's the typical sort of hourglass shape that you see when you have a tidal restriction. And what that represents is scour from the force of the volume of the tidal water being forced through a pipe or an opening that's too small. And so the velocity of the water increases and it causes that area to scour. So this was occurring then, and probably this site, I don't know a lot about the history of the site beyond the records that we have from USGS topo maps and from these photos. Although I have been told that this road has been on the landscape for hundreds of years. It may be that that this scour pool started forming much earlier than this photo, but as we know, as the sea level has been increasing and the volume of water passing through that culvert has increased, we would expect that those scour pools have also increased in size. Another thing to note is that if you're familiar with the site, you notice that very large open water area on the eastern side, on the Scarborough side of the river, is not there in this photo. And there's a small open water area in the middle, and you can see it's a little bit darker, which may indicate that it's a little bit wetter than the surrounding marsh. But that big pond wasn't there 100 years ago. So things have changed in the marsh since then. And that's another indication that water levels have been changing in this area. This is a preliminary map of some of the remnant agricultural modifications that have been made in the Spurwink Marsh. This is a pattern of ditching and diking that was used historically by farmers to freshen the salt marsh and allow them to grow agricultural crops, as well as salt hay, which was used as fodder for their livestock. This was a common practice throughout the Northeast and other parts of the East Coast. Marshes were easily farmed when Europeans first showed up here because they didn't have to cut down all the trees. And marsh farming practices were already well established in Europe at that time. So this was something that the early colonists were doing here in New England. These practices continued up until the 1900s. There's a few salt marshes in New England that are still farmed today for salt hay. But these practices have largely been discontinued. But the effects of those alterations to the surface of the marsh remain on the landscape and are being exacerbated today by increased sea level with the formation of large open water areas as vegetation dies back and those areas convert to open water and mudflats. Here's an example of what we think is a farming structure. You can see what looks like stone crossing the Spurwink River. This is upstream of Sawyer Road. And we think this is probably a former water control structure that would have been used to prevent tidal flooding upstream. And it may have been associated with a dike that you can sort of see a linear feature extending from the top to the bottom of your screen. So that's just an example of the types of things that we find in our salt marshes today that are remnants of that agricultural past. So we've been building tidal roads in salt marshes for a long time. And of course, the coasts have been inhabited for hundreds of years, and we needed roads to get around. So it made sense to do it back then. And some of the impacts of the road building in our salt marshes can be seen today through the altered hydrology. That's essentially the plumbing in the marsh, how the water moves in and out with the daily tides. These structures limit the amount of tidal flow that can pass upstream. They also can hold back fresh water when you have large rain events, causing extra flooding on the upstream side, which can change the salinity of the groundwater, changing how salty it is. And that affects the plant communities that grow there. And so we often see in restricted marshes a transition from salt water to fresh water on the fringes of those marshes. Here's a diagram from a document that was recently developed by a number of partners in Maine called the Coastwise Manual, which is a set of best practices for designing roads and road crossings in the tidal environment. And this just illustrates that tidal restriction effect. On the right-hand side, you can see three different sized crossings. Imagine a bridge or a culvert. And on the left-hand side, you can see what we call a hydrograph. That's a tidal curve of the water coming in and getting higher and then going out and getting lower. And the red line represents the upstream side and the blue line represents the downstream side. And this is just a conceptual example of what it looks like when you have an opening that's too small. The upstream flooding is much lower during that incoming tide than the downstream side. Here's a great shot from an aerial drone mission that was flown by our partners at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This is obviously right above the culvert, and you can see those large scour pools here. We have some data that was collected for that 2019 culvert study. And what you're looking at here is, again, water levels over the course of about 3 to 4 weeks. The blue line and the green line are superimposed over each other. The dashed green line is the downstream water level, and the solid blue line is the upstream water level. And then the red line represents the difference between the two. And so it's maybe kind of hard to make out, but the downstream water level is higher at the peak. The green line is higher than the blue line, so that just shows that difference at high tide. And then the red line really illustrates that difference. So when the red line is above 0 on the chart there, that means that the water levels downstream are higher than those upstream, and that's showing that restriction. But then likewise, on the outgoing tide, when the red line extends below the 0, that's showing that, again, now that that water is passed upstream, as the tide turns around, the water on the downstream side is dropping much faster than on the upstream side. And so it takes longer for the water on the upstream side to fully flush out. And then here's a picture that really demonstrates that dynamic where you have the downstream side of the marsh on the left, and you have the upstream side on the right. And this is during a king tide in November 2024. I think it was on the 15th. And you can see the effect of the road and the culvert where you have water flooding almost the entirety of the marsh on the downstream side. And it's running across the road sort of downhill, and then you have much less flooding on the upstream side. And that's just a really good illustration of that tidal restriction in action. So one of the major impacts that roads have on tidal marshes is, again, reducing that upstream flooding. But what happens during that upstream flooding is as water flows through the tidal channel, it's picking up sediment that's in the channel, and it's suspending it in the water. And then when it floods the marsh, the salt marsh grasses trap that sediment, and that's what allows the marsh to gain elevation over time. So it's actually building height as it traps that sediment, and it's been doing that for thousands of years as sea level has been rising since the last ice age. And ideally, the rate of sedimentation in the marsh would match that of sea level rise so that we wouldn't have our marshes drowning and converting to open water. But roads and undersized crossings disrupt that dynamic. And then, as I mentioned previously, well, here's another example of that open water conversion. You can probably pick out some of those linear features in this photo if you look long enough at it. But these are areas that have become saturated to the point that vegetation can no longer grow there. The vegetation then dies off. The marsh sediment, which was being held together by the roots and the rhizomes of those plants, starts to deteriorate. Bacteria start to digest that organic material, and then the marsh starts to sink. And it's a reinforcing cycle. Once the marsh becomes lower, it starts to hold more water, and these pools start to expand. And the other thing that's going on as the marsh is deteriorating is it's also releasing all of the atmospheric carbon that it's captured as those plants have been growing and fixing that carbon into their tissues. And so when you have a marsh that's falling apart like this, what you have is a really effective carbon sink, a habitat that captures atmospheric carbon that's no longer serving that function, and it starts to release it back into the atmosphere. So the salt marsh becomes a net contributor to global greenhouse gases. Here's another great shot from the air. This is the large pool next to the road. And again, this whole area has just completely become saturated and can no longer support salt marsh plants. And then the last impact I want to talk about is that freshening of areas that no longer get regular inundation with salt water. And what happens there is you have a change in the water table. It allows it to become fresher, and that allows invasive species to start taking over. And the one that we're most concerned with is known as Phragmites, also called the common reed. And if you travel Route 1 here in Scarborough, you can see that plant pretty readily. It's all along Scarborough Marsh. It's growing in the parking lot of Tractor Supply and all along the road. It's really an aggressive species, and it moves into these areas when the native plants start to die off. I don't have a good photo of the Phragmites in Spurwink Marsh, so I put in this photo. This is from Wells. This is Drake's Island Marsh. There's a tidal restriction here that's created by the road. And you can see the taller wetland plants that are growing there along the forest edge. That's Phragmites, and it's really moved in and taken over. And once it gets in there, it's really hard to get rid of. And then just here's an up-close example for folks that don't know if they've seen it before. This is what it looks like, the tall plant in the background here. So we've talked about sea level rise a little bit already tonight. This is a graph that's from the Maine Climate Council Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, of which, Pete, I believe you remember. This is your graph, right? Okay, good. So this is showing both a long-term and a more recent trend line for sea level rise at the Portland, Maine tide gauge. The blue line represents the long-term trend from 1912 to 2023, which is showing approximately 0.06 feet of sea level rise per decade. But then the red line, which shows the last 30 years or so of data at the Portland tide gauge, is a much steeper curve. So this is basically what this is showing is that sea level rise has accelerated in recent years from that long-term trend. So I'm sorry to throw lots of numbers and figures at you, but that's what we do in my work. This table comes from, well, at least these numbers come from the recent Scarborough flood vulnerability study that was completed by GEI consultants. What this is showing you in the rows in this table are the current and then the future sea level rise conditions. So sea level rise projections at the year 2030, 2050, and 2100. And then they're showing what we call tidal datums. So that's the elevation of the water at what we call mean higher high water. That's the average highest tide of the day in the year. And then the hat, or the highest astronomical tide, that's the highest tide you could expect to see about once a year, or approximately equivalent to that. And then they also included the 10-year, 50-year, 100-year, and 500-year storm recurrence intervals. And so as you read down any one of those columns, you're seeing how the elevation changes from the current elevation. So for example, the hat elevation now is 6.5 feet. And with sea level rise by 2030, you would expect that to have increased to 7.3 feet. By 2050, it will have increased to 8 feet. And by 2100, it could be increased up to 10.5 feet. And so for each one of those different flooding scenarios, you can see the increases due to projected sea level rise. So one thing I want to point out in this chart, the mean higher high water, that's the first column, at the year 2050 with sea level rise is expected to be around 6.1 feet. And that is approximately the same elevation of the low point in the road. And so basically what that means is that if these sea level rise projections pan out, then in 2050, you could expect the average daily high tide to be right at the same elevation of the road. And now I've got some figures that just kind of illustrate that on a map, which I think may be a little bit easier to look at. So this map just shows the current condition. The blue areas are the mean higher high water elevation superimposed over the map. And the yellow contour line is the highest astronomical tide line, which is essentially at the edge of the existing marsh. And then this map shows the current 10-year, 50-year, 100-year, and 500-year flood elevations. And you can see Sawyer Road in the middle of this figure. Those lines are starting to cross the road at different locations. And then this is just zoomed in. It's the same map, but just zoomed in on Sawyer Road, so you can see that much more clearly. The highest annual tide line already crosses Sawyer Road. And then you can see the 10-year, 50-year, 100-year, and 500-year storms gradually spreading out and covering more and more of the road as it moves up the hill. And then this is a figure that I put together. We went out as part of the 2019 culvert study and collected elevation measurements along the road. So I've graphed those for you here. That's the solid black line. Now keep in mind that in order to fit this graph on the screen, it is compressed. So from one end of Sawyer Road to the other, it looks a little bit more like a bowl than it actually is, right? But all of these elevations are, this is what they're relative to each other, are correct. And so what this is showing you is the 10-year, 50-year, 100-year, and 500-year flood elevations from sort of a profile angle. So you can see how that looks above the height of the road. And obviously with the larger storm events, it floods more. You can see the arrow pointing to the approximate location along the road where the culvert is. That's not the elevation of the culvert, that's the surface of the road, but that's where the culvert is along the road. And then moving from left to right, that's the Scarborough side to the Cape Elizabeth side. So we're gonna see this figure again with other flooding scenarios in just a minute. So this map, and by the way, all these maps were put together very kindly by a colleague, Bonnie Turek at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So thank you very much, Bonnie. So this map is showing the current mean higher high water and then future scenarios, mean higher high water at 2030 and 2050 with projected sea level rise. Those are the solid colors covering the map. And then it also includes that highest annual tide line. Those are the contour lines along the edge of the marsh at 2030 and 2050. So this is showing projected future conditions in the surrounding marsh and at Sawyer Street, excuse me. And then this figure just adds the 2100 scenario to that. So for both the mean high water and the highest astronomical tide lines. And then here's that zoomed in figure for Sawyer Street. And you can see that by 2050, the mean high water flood elevation, that's the average highest tide of the day during the year, is now flooding the low point of Sawyer Road. And then here's that graph that I put together, again, showing the road elevation from south to north with the mean high water elevations, both present day and the three projected sea level rise elevations. And you can see that by 2050, again, that average highest tide of the day is at the level of the road. And by 2100, it's flooding approximately 1,000 feet of roadway at the current elevation. And then here's that same figure, and now we're showing the highest astronomical tide line, present day, and under the future sea level rise scenarios. All of these tide elevations flood some part of the road, with 2100 essentially flooding from one edge of the marsh to the other. And then these last figures are zoomed in on an upstream area. This is near the Coulter Farms Road neighborhood. And this shows flooding under current conditions. This is the HAT, the mean high water, and the various storm recurrence interval flood elevations. And you can see that under current conditions, some of those homes, or at least some of their backyards, are potentially being flooded. And then this zoomed in map is showing that same area under future conditions. This is showing the 2050 highest astronomical tide, and then the 2100 mean high water elevation, and the 2100 highest astronomical tide elevation. And in this figure, it looks like the flooding, particularly under the highest astronomical tide, is reaching some of those structures. And that's all that I have for you. Thank you.
So before we move on, I just want to kind of give a summary of what the next steps are anticipated to be. So in order for this project to move forward, both towns need to go through an official process to discontinue the road, which will include a town council public hearing and a vote. So, you know, at this point, the towns have not voted to remove the road at all. So that will be forthcoming later on this fall, and assuming that both towns decide to discontinue the road, the project will continue dealing with project permitting, designing marsh enhancement, restoration, and beginning that implementation. And then road removal will occur after the marsh work the upstream marsh work has been complete, and that would be fall 2026 at the earliest, and likely pushed to fall 2027 because we are limited in when in our implementation windows for when work can happen within the marsh. Restoration of the marsh surface would occur after the road is removed. And then we will do post-construction monitoring as part of the grant requirements to see how the marsh responds to the changes. And that is what we have for you this evening. And so I am happy to open the floor to questions. We do ask if you do have questions that you come to the podium and give us your name and address so that we have an understanding of where in town you are. And again, all of us up here are here to answer questions that you may have about this project. And also if anyone has just general comments that you would like to make, please feel free to do that as well. And you can just go to the podium if you have questions or comments.
Is there a time limit on these?
If you can keep it to 3 minutes, that would be helpful. We do
So-
have a number of
so-
people in the room.
So I have a question. And there is no better person here.
Can you just introduce?
My name is Phineas Sprague. And my dad's family have been kicking around here in Scarborough and Cape Elizabeth for 125 years. And my mom's family, I figure right about 394 years. And Peter and I know each other. Pete works for the Geological Survey of Maine, and I did briefly when I was as well. Jacob, would you mind putting the title, the NOAA title graph up on the screen so Peter and I can talk about it? Because I have some questions on it, because it seems to me the basis of a lot of this concern is sea level rise and estimating the rate of sea level rise into the future. So it'd be very important to take a look at the NOAA chart. And that's the one that is off the Portland tide charts in Portland. And basically, Peter and I know that this is based on regression analysis. And the straight blue line is the regression analysis that's done by NOAA. And it is 1.98 millimeters per year. And if you'll notice, there are a couple of bumps in it where the data is going above the regression line, the slope line, and places that is going down below it. Now, let's go back to 1930 to 1960. And you'll notice that there is a cyclical nature in these. And I would like to ask Peter why the regression analysis ends up with a straight line on that one, and also a straight line through all the points that have been since they're turned orange, and why you're projecting an increase in sea level rise if the regression analysis does not show it on the NOAA charts.
First of all, thanks, Phineas, for the question.
Wait, Pete, can you put your?
Thank you for the question. This is showing existing data. There's no scenarios associated with this.
Sorry.
This is showing existing data. There are no scenarios associated with this. This is not looking into the future. This is data from 1912 to 2023. Simply the blue dots are annualized sea levels for basically each year. So you think an average sea level for that entire year. That's the blue dots from 1912 to 2023. This data has been updated since then. This is already 2 years old. Well, yeah, almost 2 years old. And then the red dots are simply the trend from the linear trend. There are two linear lines you see here, two linear regression lines from 1993 to 2023. So simply one is showing the data from 1912 to 2023. The second is showing a shorter time period, which typically you need to have at least 19.6 years to be looking at data when you're looking at tide data to complete what we call a lunar nodal cycle. So you have to look at least around 20 years of data to look at any kind of trend. So the second one is simply the same data. It's just highlighting what's happened since 1993. You could pick 2000 if you wanted as a starting point for here. In fact, a lot of the sea level rise predictions are now based from a scenario that starts in the year 2000, okay? So if we did plot up some scenarios on top of this, they would all start at the year 2000. And if we did that, and plotted on, there are graphs associated with that, and they're in the scientific and technical subcommittee's report. They've also been released through an intergovernmental task force in 2022. You would see that where we're trending currently on the basis of the data, looking at the long-term data and then the short-term data, is what we would call roughly the intermediate to the intermediate high scenario. It depends on which report you're looking at. It could be the 2017 report, which was released by the Intergovernmental Task Force. That's comprised mostly of scientists from NOAA, NASA, and then a bunch of research organizations in the United States. It's independent of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's important to point out. But if you look at the most recent study that came out in 2022, we're actually trending a little towards that little slightly higher, the intermediate high scenario, which is roughly about 1.3 feet by the year 2050, and a little bit over 4 feet by the year 2100.
So in other words, what you were saying is that this is cyclical.
There
and
certainly is a about a 19.6-year cycle
Right.
that is seeing this data. That's why you see peaks
Right.
and valleys associated with this, but the overall trend is clearly increasing at a rate of about 2 millimeters per year.
And I happen to agree with that, about 2 millimeters a year. We're both on the same page.
Right. So, but if we look at the data, Phineas, from 1912 to 2025 now, sea level's risen about 0.7 feet. And if you look at the data from 1993 to 2020, so that doesn't even include the data from 2020 to 2020.
The data is the Portland tide graph data?
Correct. We're looking at about 0.45 feet of sea level rise that has occurred. So 0.7 minus 0.45, you know, there's a difference there, and you're seeing the majority of that increase occurring since 1993.
So, but none of that is anywhere close to the basic predictions that they're using in this study to make people concerned about the sea level
That's
rise.
incorrect. There's what they use is what's called an observation extrapolation in the scenarios. So you can look, if you go to NOAA's sea level rise calculator, it's a very good website. It shows the long-term data, and then it shows an observation extrapolation associated with that. So it's based on the observation, extrapolates it out to the year 2050 based on the current trend. And then you can compare by clicking scenarios on and off what scenario that trend is kind of looking at. So yeah, it's based on a longer term trend, but it's simply an extrapolation of that. It doesn't take into account any curves going higher or anything. I agree with you. Sea level's going to have to speed up to meet some of those curves, but it already has.
Big time.
Yeah, but it already has. It used to be 2 millimeters. Now we're at about 4 millimeters per year.
I
Over
don't
about the last
see that
20
on
years.
the chart. You'll have to
Yeah,
show me that
It's
in the
right.
chart.
It's right there.
No, I see the mean line, which is blue, and
It's a
somebody
linear
else
trend.
put another line here that goes that way, but I don't see the same a line in the previous ones where the data is similar. You would have seen an regression analysis, you would have seen that the thing would have gone like this, which is a sine curve.
Yeah,
And
it's a
anywhere
linear
on the
trend.
sine curve, you get a different trend.
Sure, of course. You're
Right?
interpreting the
And if you
data
do it short
differently.
enough, and it's a sine curve, and it happens every 19 years or whatever,
But this is over the 20-year period for the lunar.
but we're
node cycle.
talking about geology,
All right,
not weather.
I'm going to ask
Thank
that
you.
we,
I'm gonna come back one more time and do a comment on this.
Okay.
My name's Robin Saunders. I live at 150 Highland Avenue, Pleasant Hill area, not too far from Coulthard Farms. I had the privilege of serving on the vulnerability assessment working group that met ad hoc throughout the year. And I just wanted to commend the town on taking on such an important effort. And there are a lot of really hard discussions that we're going to have as a town when we go and look at all those 30 roads that are on our priority list. And Sawyer Street seems to me like this is the lowest hanging fruit that we can achieve. The road has redundancy. The road has shown itself to be very expensive to maintain and also improve to meet standards moving forward. So As a member of the Vulnerability Assessment Working Group, I'm here to say that this is the first of a lot of really hard conversations that this town is going to need to have. And this is the easiest of them. It's fairly straightforward, what needs to be done here to benefit the town. And as a taxpayer, it only makes sense that the $10 million not be spent here to put a bridge. And it's just good common sense, but it's backed up by hard science and really earnest work by you all. Thank you.
Hi, Randy Hogan. I live in Ocean View Harbor in Scarborough, and I'm also a member of the Conservation Commission. And I appreciate that this is a conversation that Scarborough is having, as well as Cape Elizabeth. And I want to speak to some comments that I heard from Cape Elizabeth meeting recently. But I want to start out by saying that this is really an incredible opportunity to protect a very valuable natural resource. So to my neighbor in Cape Elizabeth, I too used to live in Maryland, and I've seen how the Department of Natural Resources in Maryland has done and continues to do really great work converting old rail beds and upland roads into trails in environmentally sensitive degraded areas. When trails crossed tidal wetlands, they used bridges and boardwalks. They didn't leave obsolete roads blocking marsh and other wetlands. You can balance conservation and public access, but only if you put ecological function in first. So that's exactly the approach that I love that we're advocating here with Sawyer Street. Sawyer Street isn't like the work done in Maryland. It sits in a tidal marsh. It floods regularly. We see that with our own eyes and in plenty of pictures shown here. And it blocks the very restoration this project is meant to achieve. Leaving it in place, even if just for walking and biking and cross-country skiing, isn't like having a rail trail or a waterfront park. It would continue to choke the marsh and saddle both of our towns with an unsafe liability. And the smarter path is to remove the road, restore the marsh fully, and then create new resilient trails and bridges if we want, with a waterfront park and benches to be able to complement the restoration with wonderful recreation. The other piece I want to remark on is our fiscal responsibility as a town. Every time the road floods, police, fire, and public works are called out to block access, assist drivers, and make repairs. That ties up our emergency services and costs all of us as taxpayers. And removing the road eliminates those repeated risks and expenses, freeing up our resources for much more critical infrastructure that serves the whole community here in Scarborough and Cape Elizabeth. The other thing I want to say is that when Sawyer Street was first put in, people didn't have the understanding that we have today about marshes and climate risks. Engineering standards were very different. It wasn't seen as a mistake back then, but today keeping this street is a mistake. We know better now, and we know that knowing better means that we have the responsibility to do better. Remove the road, restore the marsh, and plant smarter connections for the future. I'm looking forward to more opportunities to comment on this project and support the town of Scarborough in doing the right thing. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Roger Hale. I live at 264 Broad Turn Road, Scarborough, Maine. Not quite the vintage of our previous speaker. I've only been here since 1970. But I've seen a lot of changes, and I guess my point is that this is a working road, and I dispute the $10 million to fix it because I'm a contractor, and I believe that's a very high number. I don't know where that number fell out of the sky, but it's not correct. I'll point out that I think this is a very bad idea to take a town road out of service. I use the road, not often, but I use it. If you can do that with this road, what about the Eastern Trail? That blocks the marsh. Shouldn't we take that out too? I mean, you're saying that this is such a distraction and it's gonna destroy what it's gonna destroy. The Eastern Trail, a lot of us have worked very hard to get the Eastern Trail through. And what's the difference? You, you know, 20 years ago, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. 50 years ago, somebody would have said, they're nuts. But I'll reserve that because times are certainly different. And the modern generation thinks in a way that I really can't understand. You have something existing. The pollution you're going to cause tearing this out, the effluent going back and forth, and nobody even knows what's in this road. They're going to take borings. That lets you know what's right there. It doesn't let you know what's over there. Borings are mostly for the depth and ledge and whatever. I just conclude that this is today. Tomorrow, somebody's going to propose taking the Eastern Trail out. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Ann Gallaudet, and I live on Colthart Farms Road. I'm aware that Ed McCall has written you, Ms. Fitch, along with the town council, and he's raised 56 questions with you about what you should be considering before you go further with this project. And I too agree with his questions, and I hope that you make them a part of this record and that you do consider them seriously before you bring this to the town council. Also, Mr. Aman, you showed a slide on Colthart Farms, and you just said, here's what the water is now and what it would be in 2030. Why did you show that slide to us?
In preparing for my presentation, I understood that there was concern about the impacts upstream in that area. And I believe that it's very important to consider flooding risks when thinking about planning for future improvements. So I thought that it would be of interest, so I did include it. One thing I will say is that the road at the current elevation, when it overtops, it's not preventing that flooding. So I showed that flooding for people's information, but if the expectation is that leaving the road in will prevent that future flooding to those neighborhoods, that is not the case. So under the original planning work that the town was doing, the concept that they were looking at was actually raising the road, but also increasing the size of the opening. So that would allow additional tidal flooding upstream. And that's the approach that we were looking at during that 2019 study. But since that time, because of the cost, the towns have started looking at removal of the road. So anyway, that's why I included that.
What I would have thought that you had gone one more step because of the purpose of this meeting, to explain to us, if you remove the road, what is the impact of marsh migration on the property, particularly on the east side of Colthart Farms, where you've already showed that there's rising waters, and we know that we have marsh along there. What would be the impact? And then that includes everything that you're going to do, not just in terms of moving land and dealing with invasive species, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Marsh migration is a result, potentially, of the increased flooding, but it's not the hazard. The flooding is the risk to the property. You're going to be underwater. I mean, a lot of people that are in areas where water is encroaching on their yards, they choose to armor and they build riprap, or they put up other barriers to that water. That would prevent marsh migration to a certain extent. But once your soils start to become saturated, that's when the soil conditions become favorable for salt marsh vegetation. So you might get salt marsh plants growing in those areas.
So you're saying that removing the road will have no additional impact in any way on the properties along Cold Hart Farms.
That's correct. Under its current configuration, it's not going to hold back sea level rise because the water is just going to go over it. So if I could give you an analogy, if you imagine the corridor of Sawyer, Spurwink Marsh as a river, think of the road as like a log that's embedded in the bottom of the river. So as the water flows over through that area, it might create a small wave at lower elevations, but once the water gets deep enough, the river doesn't even know that that log is there. It's just flowing.
So I guess my question to you, and I'll end with this, I don't want to take up any more time, is that you've spent a lot of time with the differential in tides on either side of the road, but you're saying removing the road isn't going to have any additional impact.
The focus on the hydraulic head differential across the road is about the impact on the marsh itself, the current marsh, not on the properties upstream.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Diane Visick. I live on 207 Spurwink Road in Scarborough. I walk or ride my bike on that road almost daily. And when I do sunrise, sunset, middle of the day, there are people birding, there are people painting, there are people walking, enjoying what you referred to as an amazing resource here in Scarborough. I've been here 15 years and I've seen increase in population and not an increase in recreational areas for this population to enjoy the natural beauty. And I know one of the goals of Scarborough is to preserve a certain percent of Scarborough for the natural beauty and enjoyment of that. I guess my question is, why are the only two choices either keep the road or get rid of the road? And why there's not an option of building some type of a walkway or something where wheelchairs, bikes, pedestrians, painters, birders could still access the beauty of that section of the marsh. Why that isn't discussed or hasn't been an option. My understanding in my conversations with some folks here today is that we would lose the grant if we don't take out the road. And I would ask why we can't expand that into some type of a wonderful opportunity for the growing population in Scarborough to enjoy the marsh. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I can respond to that. So the scope of this grant is to remove the road. And that includes the sub-base gravels and everything and restore the marsh to a more natural condition. As one of the previous residents who got up to speak said, in the future, there may be opportunities to add ecologically appropriate access points potentially. Cape Elizabeth is talking about a lookout. As far as Scarborough is concerned, we have over 100 roads and a lot of other at-risk infrastructure. And so maintaining any additional infrastructure in sensitive areas is an investment that I'm not sure that the town wants to make when we have already existing infrastructure, critical infrastructure that does need to be maintained and improved to improve resiliency. So it is a loss of the access there. But as was also mentioned, these are difficult conversations that we're going to be faced with. We're not talking about just today or tomorrow. We're talking about, decades into the future and what the town is going to be facing. And there are other access areas. Scarborough Land Trust has access along the Spurwink Marsh. Obviously, we've got, as was mentioned, the Eastern Trail. As to my knowledge, there's no plans to remove the Eastern Trail. But there are areas of the Eastern Trail that also need to be improved because they are tidal restrictions, just like we're talking about. So these are tough conversations to have, but this is what we're facing as a community and where our investments are going to be most important. And we've got primary routes and evacuation routes that need to be upgraded, I think, before investments are made for additional infrastructure in sensitive areas.
So in other words, those things will get the funding and the priority over and above any recreational or improvements in that sense.
That is a decision to be made at the town council level through the budgeting process. But that is what I would expect would happen, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Brenda Harrison, or Brenda Stanford Harrison, 191 Spurwink Road. My family, the Stanfords, have been 5 generations right on Spurwink Road. They have been the farmers that probably help with the road. And my biggest concern, I went to Cape Elizabeth last night, and I hear that this has been talked about since 2017. And I live at 191, so I'm right around the corner, and I use the road daily. And I'm not educated in the environment. I'm sentimental to the road, so I'm sure I'm in the minority. I'm 75, I'm still in my family's home. And that road means a lot to many of us, but I didn't hear the information coming out to even have the discussion. I never got a letter till this meeting. I had to have a friend in Cape Elizabeth give me a letter, so that I went to Cape Elizabeth a year ago, and then I came here a year ago, and as far as that, when I left here a year ago, it was a done deal. From when we left, someone stated, as of 2026, the road would start being remediated, and if the road should collapse or something in 25, the road would be closed. So I thought it was a done deal. It was $185,000 for both towns. And then I go to Cape last night and find out that it's not a done deal. They're going to vote October 15th. And now here we are tonight. And there are many longtime residents that use that road that's been here a lifetime. And the road means a lot. And from what I hear, there hasn't even been much maintenance on the road since 2017. Is that because it was already put in plan to take it out? So I wish there was more information. I'm a lifetime resident. We use the road. It means a lot to us, and we'd rather see it fixed than not torn out. And I'm sorry I don't understand all the environment and all of that, but some of us have been here forever, and it means a lot. And I just wish we had more information and it's more public letters out or something for the ones of us who live near the road. And anyway, we use it all the time. Thank you.
I guess I'd probably take this opportunity to clarify a little bit of the process. And I know we had a couple joint council meetings with Cape Elizabeth and the town of Scarborough, which gave us the opportunity to show that there was this grant available. That was how we moved forward. That wasn't done without council action or that ability for staff to kind of move forward with that. And looking at this grant opportunity. And so what you're talking about as far as council action, the next step is a discontinuance of the road, which has been part of the process. There's many steps to this process. So which ones come first is always kind of tricky as you start going through a complex process when you're talking about grant opportunities, right? So I know there was also comments made about the order in which this is happening as far as discontinuance. It doesn't make sense for us to start with a discontinuance and then have council say, okay, let's move ahead with this grant. It really needs to make sure we have that kind of buy-in before we go too far down that path. So that's the kind of step we're at now, which is a public process. I think it was important to get out I know there was a lot of data, a lot of details, a lot of numbers. But I think for Scarborough, just trying to get that information and the facts out, because I think there is also a lot of misinformation that's happening out there. So it is good that we have this public feedback tonight so we can kind of address some of those comments. And again, there is a public hearing that will happen in front of council associated with that discontinuance that the public is welcome to make comments of that. And that is another council action. That is just yet one more council action to keep the project moving. But there's opportunities coming too.
But Cape Elizabeth has already got plans there showing turnarounds and parking areas and closing on their side, and they've already gone and got designs.
Well,
They were showing those last night that they got, huh?
Yeah, I have seen that they thought it was important, their residents, because they didn't have the opportunities Scarborough has on our side for different opportunities to access the marsh. I think they heard from their residents that an overlook was important to them of some sort. So I think what you saw was some rendering. So basically a sketch and not a
But some of their
design yet.
residents
Yeah.
were caught off guard by that far ahead in advanced planning with the
Okay,
parking and from what I heard last night.
okay.
So it was, yeah, anyway. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Steve Mallory and I do live at 22 Sawyer Street. First question, once the road is gone, we can expect the flood not to be as high? Are we getting most of this flood on the flush? Because it can't get out fast enough?
Yeah, you can take that one.
You mean in terms of the impacts to the marsh itself?
And abutting properties to the marsh?
Removing the roads will not have an impact on the adjacent properties as far as I can tell.
Does it affect how high the flood will be? If the road's gone, are we expecting the high flood line to stay where it is, or will it drop once the road's gone?
More or less, it will stay where it is. This is a concept that I still struggle with a little bit, but when you have an embankment like that and you have tide coming in, that restriction can actually raise the level of the flood a little bit because you have that water that's pushing up against it. And so locally, as it pushes up against that barrier, it can raise the water level a little bit. I can't tell you how much that is. It's such a small barrier because it's just right at the highest tide line. So I can't tell you how much it does. It's probably not that much, but it is increasing, probably slightly increasing the flood level. And if you were to build the road higher, I think you would see that effect being more pronounced in other parts of the marsh.
Now, 50, 60 years ago, you couldn't walk down the Spurwink River to Higgins Beach because there was too much water there. Now you can walk halfway. That sand's all getting washed in from Higgins Beach, I assume?
Oh, I wanted to make a comment on your first question, and then I can talk about your second one. One of the things that causes flooding that is not just tidally related, or what we call combined storm events. So if you think about it like a high tide, and then you have like 3 or 4 inches of rain that falls, and all that water drains into a portion of the Spurwink River, and it's harder for that water to actually get out when you have a tidal restriction. So, and that's not just at Sawyer Road / Sawyer Street. It's anytime you have a tidal restriction. So sometimes when you have very large rain events combined with a tide event, think about what happens actually in Portland all the time along Back Cove. That's exactly what it is. The water can't get out because the tide is high, and then all the rain falls and it collects around Marginal Way. The water just can't get out with the tide. So the same thing kind of happens a little bit at the Spurwink Marsh system. So not having a restriction there would actually help alleviate when you have these combined storm events, which is a high tide and then 3 or 4 inches of rain falling, which does happen sometimes because we do have coastal storms that mix with very large rain events.
So it should be easier for the water to flush.
To get out.
With the road gone.
To get out.
Okay.
And
if the Spurwink River down towards Higgins Beach wasn't bone dry at low tide, like it used to be 50 years ago.
There's been a lot of sand pushed up into the Spurwink River over the years.
Is that affecting the flush all the way from the marsh back out to the ocean?
I don't think so, no. It has time to get out. Yeah, it has time to get out. Yeah, because I mean, there's still, If you go down there at low tide, it's pretty much drained out in most of the locations, even though the sand levels are higher. So especially near Higgins Beach, you do get a lot of sand that gets pushed in with storms. Finn can tell you about this all the time because he lives right there. And you know, and I fish that area a lot, so I can talk about that as well. But that isn't of a situation where you're actually impounding water above it. There's enough gradient and there's enough flow for most of that water to be able to get out at the mouth of the Spurwink River. That's the sand there isn't necessarily a problem with that.
Okay. The only other question I had was your turnarounds. What can you tell me about your turnarounds and locations for them?
I know we discussed trying to do that within the public right of way as one option being at your private road. The other option being an agreement with the Rachel Carson Preserve. And so we are going through that's why I'd like to continue conversations with you, as well as at the same time, we're going through multiple paths so that we have multiple options to kind of present and see what we can come up with that's the best fit.
Yeah, because.
And I know we talked about some of the issues, and
Right.
so I'd love to continue that conversation.
Because putting it at the end of my driveway, a plow truck's gonna have to back up 150 feet in a blizzard just to get to the turnaround from where he's gonna stop plowing. That doesn't even make sense. And if they plow the area at the end of my driveway that they want to make bigger for a turnaround, when that snow melts, it's gonna flood out my neighbor's horse paddock.
So I will say we have had conversations internally with police, fire, public works, and kind of trying to figure out where that hammerhead would be situated. So those are ongoing conversations, and we definitely will have you be part of that conversation.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
My name's Lydia Jopp. I live at 197 Spurwink, so very close to Sawyer Street, and use the road frequently, several times a day. It's our way to town. It's our way to work, to daycare, and it will be a major inconvenience that we will get used to. But I just want to offer my support for this project. I think it's exciting to have something right in our own backyard that's going to make such a big difference. The marsh and that road it's so beautiful and so special to drive through. I mean, like seeing like the northern lights and like big moons and all sorts of birds, but you also feel like you don't really belong there. I mean, it's human beings can't be everywhere. So we wouldn't build that road today, and I think 20 something years from now we'll be like, wow, there was a road there. It's a ecosystem. Like, how could there be a road there? So I just want to offer my support. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Felicity Kerr, and I live at 10 Starbird, which is in the marsh off Spurwink. And this weekend, that road would have been our quickest way to Main Med if we'd needed rescue, because Pleasant Hill is closed and it's faster than going across the Cape Bridge, which is down to 1 lane at the moment. So I like the road. I use it several times a day to get everywhere. And the other question that has sort of come up is, oh, what pretty things can we have after we take out the road? Well, isn't it Rachel Carson that's going to make that decision, not the town of Scarborough? And I think if you don't put up the property lines, people will have the idea that the town will have some control over that, which it will not.
Yeah, the town is not anticipating any kind of scenic overview or anything like that at that location.
Right, because it's Rachel Carson, not the town.
Well, the town still maintains the right of way. And so we will, through the discontinuance process, we would be giving up a portion of the town right of way, and it would revert to the landowners on either side.
Okay, which would be Rachel Carson for the
Right, but I was just saying, if the town was interested in maintaining any kind of access point or scenic overlook, it could. At this point, we do not intend to because of the flood risk of the area. Our side of the road is a lot lower than Cape Elizabeth's. So the flooding is more likely to happen on the Scarborough side. And through our vulnerability assessment, we don't want to put any infrastructure in sensitive areas and flood-prone areas. So yeah, we're not anticipating putting any kind of public access overlook, anything like that.
Yeah, but you'll have a turnaround. People will park at it and yeah, so that's just kind of my point, that you haven't been upfront about who actually owns the land on either side in your pictures.
Yeah, I'm happy to tell you, one side is privately owned and the other side is the Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge. I didn't intend for that to be a secret. It's public information and on the town's website. So yeah, those are the landowners that the right of way would revert to.
And I'm glad I didn't need rescue this weekend.
Good evening. Thank you for hearing from me. My name is Ed McCall. I live just outside of Scarborough in the town of Cape Elizabeth at 78 Wells Road. I own property on the marsh. I maintain trails open to the public right down to the marsh. Everybody's welcome to come use my trail, sit on my chairs down by the marsh. It's a beautiful spot, not as beautiful as the road crossing, as the crossing of the marsh at Sawyer Street. I've been speaking about this since I first heard about it. I think removing the street is a serious mistake, and most of the comments this evening about the benefits of removing the street are based on misunderstandings. The first misunderstanding is that, as far as I could tell, nobody on either town council or on either town staff understood that the road is and always has been designed to flood. It's a feature of the road that is widely recognized in the international community for new roads through tidal areas to allow tidal flow. And this road was substantially changed in 1963 by the town of Scarborough and the DOT on the Cape side to preserve the design flowing, but to limit the chance that there would be flooding at the culvert. It's a combined floodway culvert on purpose. So it does allow tidal exchange over the surface of the road. There are safety concerns that have been raised about the flooding. I think the correct solution for those is a flashing sign at the last turnaround on either side, the last junction, which for Scarborough would be at Route 77, and for Cape would be at Wells Road, my road, warning that road closed ahead, and then down at the road, so you could get to your home, would be a gate past the last driveway, so people couldn't drive out on the road. That's the correct couple $1,000 safety solution. The correct solution to allowing tidal exchange is the one we have. Let the road flood when the tide needs to flood to get water, as much water as we want, to the upstream side. If somebody wants more upstream flooding, lower the road and close it more often with the signs and the gates. Mr. Raymond, with due respect, we can't have it both ways. If the road doesn't block water from getting to the upstream homes, it likewise doesn't and won't block water from getting to the upstream marsh. I think that's why you have photos of invasive freshwater plants in other marsh areas, but not in this one. There are, of course, freshwater wetlands around this marsh, including on my property where I have a bridge that you're all invited to walk across on your way down to the marsh. That's a freshwater wetland. It has cat o' nine tails and other freshwater plants in it. But down at the marsh, it is a saltwater marsh. The ponds that you showed in the picture, I believe, are the ponds in front of my house. There's no plan to remove those. With respect to the future process, it's important to understand both towns have to go through the statutory process for road closure, which requires a notice after the towns adopt a proposed order, then a public hearing, and then a vote on the proposal. Hopefully, everybody on both sides of the issue will be as informed as possible and will make sure their respective town councils hear from them. This floodway is an ecological advancement far ahead of its time. International organizations like USAID, which we're trying to abolish, promote these floodways around the world because they're such a wonderful way to have tidal exchange and have transportation, except when the tide needs to be exchanged over the road surface. Of course, there are better ways to maintain the pavement that exist right now on Sawyer Street, and we should be maintaining it a little bit better. It has not been expensive, with due respect to the member of the long-term committee from Scarborough who spoke. The total expenditures of the town of Scarborough for the last 16 years on that road, including tree work, none of which was down in the marsh, is $13,000. The total expenditures of the town of Scarborough in the last 6 years is $782. Cape spends far less because we don't maintain the road. We don't need to raise it. We shouldn't raise it. That would block flow. We should preserve it the way it is, enhance it, enjoy it, love it. It is the most beautiful spot in the area and the best sunrise every day of the year. I sent the council a photograph of this morning's sunrise. They are spectacular every single day. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna try to address a couple of things because I know this has come up in the past. I have spoken with DOT, a few staff members. The chief engineer is Bill Pulver. The bridge has part of the bridge division, Ron Taylor, which I believe talked to or emailed with Mr. McCall, as well as Pete Coughlin, who is the head of Maine Local Roads. And so with those conversations, those three, I do have in writing that I think there was some misunderstanding by Mr. McCall, and that DOT has confirmed that this road was not designed to flood. It was in 1963, this was a state aid road. That's why DOT participated. In 1963, they went in and replaced a culvert. They did raise the road at the culvert. At the time, the Scarborough town line was about 50 feet from the culvert. So we actually, Scarborough did not own that culvert, Cape Elizabeth did. And so what happened is they raised it. As far as DOT is concerned, they were just focused on that crossing, raised it to where the elevations were that they saw as high tide elevations, and left it for the town of Scarborough to connect the dots, basically raising it, say 2 to 3 feet, and then connect it to wherever you kind of blend into the existing grade. It was specifically called out as just adding road gravel and really just doing the kind of the minimal to get that across. So I have confirmed that it wasn't intended to, it wasn't designed to flood. It was a leftover remnants of, this is a road that floods. We're going to address what we can, and the rest the town will take on is kind of how we deal with future maintenance. So I just wanted to confirm that. The other thing I did like to stop to is
plans from 63 include
with
the Scarborough work. And
2019.
they show Scarborough leaving the high point, the low point of the road at its then low point, including with the Scarborough Road, which at the time was 1 full foot below astronomical high tide. And that low point was then the low point. It is still the low point, and it is still about 1 full foot below astronomical high tide.
Correct.
That
The
is a
town
design
did not
feature.
address it at that
It was a joint design between the DOT and the town of Scarborough.
And DOT has confirmed that that is not correct, that it was going back to the existing grade. So it was just a limited effort from the town of Scarborough at the time. But I did want to address also some cost estimates that have come up a few times. I know in the 2019, we had some figures from a consultant where we were looking at what would it cost. Part of that was $2 to $5 million just looking at the replacement of that culvert. That number obviously would have to be escalated to today's numbers. And just to give a background, I did also with DOT look at their 3-year work plan. They have the next 25, 26, and 27. If you go through that, you will also see what this is called as a minor span. It's not an actual bridge. Their bridge division does inspect it annually, but they don't have any responsibility or liability to contribute towards its replacement. It's completely on the town. to deal with. So looking at what, say, a DOT bridge or a minor span that they are responsible for, if it was, say, on Route 1 or Route 9, that they would be responsible for, those numbers, looking at kind of a range between $3 to $6 million. Again, that's just the culvert. So when we started talking about it, someone else had mentioned about a number that was thrown at a 10. I think that was looking at if we did more than just the culvert. If we did want to address beyond, as Mr. McCall had mentioned, if we just did the culvert and we let it flood, that's what we're talking about, is looking at, say, 3 to 6 million. If you start looking at what do you need to do to actually keep this road from flooding and not closing it periodically and having public safety deal with that, that's when you're talking about a major bridge. I mean, that is a long span across that marsh, and doing some substantial structure to try to get across there. So I just wanted to, I guess, clarify a few things.
If I might, ma'am, the cost of putting in the culvert that's there was a 1997 project, and the total cost to put in that culvert was $56,000. It was paid 60% by the state, which may or may not pay anything now, and 40% by Cape, nothing by Scarborough. I'm not really sure that the town line has been moved to the culvert. That's an interesting.
Confirm that it has moved to this channel. So
How-
now I should clarify that in 1989, there was, it takes legislative action to move a town line. And that did happen. It got rolled in with a few edits from different town property lines. So that has happened. So this, I'm not suggesting that it's Cape's problem. I didn't mean to insinuate that, this is a joint project, definitely.
The other thing that should be considered is that in terms of cost, there's been representation by Ms. Fitch this evening that the town's contribution would be $185,000, which is true under the current memorandum of understanding. A substantial part of the grant is for moving ditches and berms on federal land in Scarborough. Right now, Cape is agreeing to manage that process. It's completely lost on me how Cape got hoodwinked into that, or either town would be hoodwinked into that. A part of the grant under $1 million is for road removal. We don't have any bids for the road removal. We don't know how much road removal will cost or where the materials will go, nor, because we haven't done any borings yet, do we know what's in the centuries-old road. I understand that Cape has asked Scarborough to amend the memorandum of understanding between the towns so that if Cape ends up on the hook for another $1 million or $2 million because the guesstimates we have for what this project costs turn out to be low, which they will, Scarborough would pick up the other half. I would respectfully ask the residents of Scarborough and the residents of Cape to say we need to redo this deal. We should do the marsh enhancement on federal land, but the federal government should manage it and pay for it. And then we should wait and see whether the road's a problem. If the road's a problem in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or 50 years, it can be removed then. Either towns could vote to close the road. If they did, Rachel Carson would own both sides past the last house. And it could do whatever it wanted with the road on its nickel, with its expertise. The federal government, the wealthiest, most powerful entity in the world, we shouldn't be doing this and paying for it. Thank you very much.
And I don't want to do it back and forth, so thank you for finishing, but I did want to clarify a few things. So a typical federal or state grant, the boilerplate language in that for any opportunity that the municipalities take on does have a clause in there that anything over the cost of the project is borne by the local entities. I will say that's the exact same language we have for the Eastern Trail project we're doing now, or any of the others, even state projects we've done with Gorham Road or the work we're doing in North Scarborough. Those all have in there the same exact language, so that is not unique to this project. What is unique is with this grant, there had to be one entity that the grant is with, that is Cape Elizabeth. So in the process, in the background, there is an MOU so that we're doing it as partners and in equal partners. And I will also say that as you do a project, like you said, we always have overages for different projects. When you started talking about building a road or building infrastructure, I think when you start talking about removing, you see that quantity, you know what it is, you can get a better handle on those estimates. And so the likelihood that those would be exorbitant numbers is extremely low, and to the point that we not only have one contingency in our grant, we have two contingencies in that grant. So that's getting paid for by the state as well. And I think those, I'm trying to make sure I got everything. I think that's it for now.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been a partner on this project. There is work that's going to be occurring on U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's land. And we haven't talked about that tonight, but I'll just briefly describe what that is, because Mr. McCall mentioned the concern about the road, but removing the road, potentially adding flooding to the marsh surface. One of the key components of this project is to address flooding and the expansion of those pools on the marsh surface. And that's a separate but parallel part of the project, where we will have a design expert come in and design modifications to the marsh. These are minor modifications that include digging what are called runnels, which are essentially shallow drainage ditches. It may also include maintaining, cleaning out some of the existing ditches so that tidal water can reach some of those areas that are now holding fresh water and supporting invasive species. And so that restoration work is going to be occurring prior to the road removal, so that when that additional flooding to the marsh does occur, those areas are able to accommodate that flooding, and the tides can move in and then back out with every tidal cycle, so that we're not retaining additional water on the marsh surface. In addition to that, I want to just point out that all of the work that's occurring on the federal land is being paid for through the grant. And Jamie could probably speak more about the decision for how the money flows through one entity, which is the town, and then that's getting distributed to various contractors, or would be distributed to various contractors that are doing this work. And then additionally, I also want to mention that both U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and my organization, the Wells Reserve, are providing match in the form of staff time to support the extensive monitoring work that's going to be required. We've already spent quite a deal of time putting together the work plan that's required by MNRCP in cooperation with the towns. And both of our organizations have committed to ongoing support for this work throughout the life of the project. That's it. Thank you.
Can I also, before you speak, I just wanted to throw it out there for anyone online, if you want to raise your hand and ask a question. I'm also watching for that, so there's no hands yet.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Kathleen Miller. I live at 277 Broad Turn Road, and I am a member of the Conservation Commission. I want to thank you all for the technical and ecological information that you shared tonight. It was a lot of data that was really helpful to hear. I'm here to speak in support of this project because of the ecological benefits of the road removal. However, I also really want to acknowledge all of the people in the room who are having a lot of emotional responses, and acknowledging that we don't have to be on opposite teams. We can have smart ecological decision making and also care for each other. And I think that the town is trying to balance that in so many different ways. And as has been said by other people, the choices that we have to make as a town are going to be excruciatingly hard as things accelerate. And we all see the sea rising. We all know what's happening in our neighborhoods and in our roads. And we are all going to lose many things. And I think to not acknowledge that is foolish of all of us, and to not be able to be present with the fact that that we are all going to lose. Every single person in this room is going to lose something or many things that we love over the course of the next 20 years, 50 years. We don't know what, sea level rise is going to bring to our town, but we live on the water. And this is something that I think we all just have to kind of spend some time really thinking about and thinking about what we want to protect. And so I appreciate the dialogue that we're having and the ability for people to share what their experience and thoughts are. And I appreciate you all for your work. Thanks.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come and speak. I was pretty upset. Like many people, I was told that this was a done deal. So I kept my mouth shut. But this really sits on a three-legged stool, this idea of taking the road out. And it's a bad idea. The first leg of the stool was that us humans didn't have an opportunity at the beginning to get into the decision whether or not taking the road out was going to make our lives better. That leg is gone now, and we have the opportunity to speak our piece. It's an important part of the process as the cart was put thoroughly before the horse. The decision made to remove the road was a solution looking wildly for a problem. The problem had to be manufactured in order to create a really big and useful problem. Someone had to decide that a 300-year-old plus road that served us well for generations, was a problem. And they needed a financial hand grenade to throw at the councils that has been silently doing its job for a pittance. How is this accomplished and entered into the public record? Was that the stakeholders on this committee decided that the existing road design, and I object to your assessment with the DOT because it says on it where the high tide line is going to be and where the astronomical high tide was over the road, and that wasn't a mistake. They decided that the road was never supposed to flood in this new design. The cost of doing that is absurd. They gave you all an absurd price for two potential things that you would never do logically. And then they told you taking out the culvert was going to cost millions of dollars when my friend Skip Murray did it in 1997 for, I thought it was $53,000, and he gave me an estimate the other day of about $150,000. You've created the problem that they're using to support this. That's the second leg of the stool that we just knocked out. The third leg is that it's all dependent upon an argument that Pete and I had about what the predicted sea level rise is going to be. I use the NOAA tide charts for Portland. There has been no acceleration of that average since 1912. Because I'm a geologist, I can look back 2,000 years and tell you the line's basically been the same. Nobody in his right mind would not use the Portland tide gauge to predict what is going to go on next year. And anybody who wants to bet with me, I will use that, because when Pete did the last one in 2013 for COG, the prediction has failed every year since then. And you can see that on the Portland tide chart. So those are the three legs of the stool. Well, there's a lot of other stuff that Ed has pointed out, which is technical. But this is ridiculous. 300 years of my family's the reason why you had the earthquake the other day, because they were all rolling over in the graves because this is so stupid. So I want to thank you very much. And if you have any questions with me about the interpretation of the DOT road, I'd be glad to do it either now or later.
I don't know if you wanted to speak to anything. I just wanted to point out, and I don't want to have it back and forth. You're right. We can have an offline conversation.
We should have had that
I'm just
5 years ago.
providing facts from the DOT, and I also wanted to throw out there that we have had a lot of experience in Scarborough with failing culverts and doing a lot of work and permitting through Army Corps of Engineers. The fact is that the 97 culvert would not be allowed to be reinstalled as it is the same size, that same component. The regulations have changed. They would provide us with some guidance around that, which would be a much larger box culvert and the opening there. So it's not an apples to apples comparison. We can't, I mean, we're dealing that Scotto Hill Road as an example. I can't go in and replace those exact culverts. It's not possible. We're trying to go through that permitting now. So I just wanted to point that out.
All right, good evening. My name is Aubrey Strauss. I live at 90 Beach Ridge Road, Scarborough. And I'm interested in this project for two reasons. The first is that I work in South Portland and often drive across this road on the way to my mother-in-law's house, who's on Spurwink. And it is absolutely gorgeous. Everybody who has talked about that earlier this evening, the resources, the opportunity for bird watching, the sunsets and the sunrises, it's true, absolutely true. The other reason I'm interested in this project is because I'm a municipal engineer in a neighboring community. And all coastal communities are going to have this conversation. It's a hard conversation. We're going to have to talk about making hard decisions about what roads to decide to invest in with limited money, right? That's getting continuously squeezed. And that means sometimes closing roads, including beloved ones. So Scarborough and Cape are dealing with this now. I'm probably going to have to deal with this in the next 10 years. So I understand that and I'm interested in the process. I really have 3 points I wanted to make tonight. The first one has already been mentioned. Angela actually talked a bit about it. I listened to the Cape hearing on Monday night and I heard the assessment that this road was designed to flood. And I was planning on talking much more about that. Angela covered it well, but it was not designed to flood. When we look at those 1963 plans, what we do see is a projection of how often the road was going to flood, okay? And that was considered an acceptable risk. It was considered acceptable that water would overtop that road a certain number of times a year. Something that hasn't been really mentioned is that every time that road overtops, every time water goes over the road, a little bit of damage is done every time. You can't hear me? I'm sorry. Well, gosh, should I start over? Can we reset the clock? I mean, I'll even use the same name. I won't change my name or anything. I'm sorry. Is it better now? What? What happened? Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'm going to use my grown-up voice. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about was the assessment that this road was designed to flood. That's not what the 1963 plans show. The 1963 plans show a projection of how often the road would flood. What I wanted to mention is that every time the road, some of that damage you can see in the asphalt that's breaking off the edges of the road. But some of the damage we can't see, and we don't know what that damage is because the surface, the subsoil underneath the road and the gravels are saturated. That means fines can move out. That means there's a little bit of compaction happening. There's differential settlement. We can't see that damage right now. So I wanted to point out that every time that road floods, a little bit of damage is happening. The second point I wanted to make is something that I heard at the Cape meeting the other night, which was talking about how do we improve the road? How can we invest in this road to keep it usable, to keep it beautiful? And the estimate of $10 million has been mentioned, which includes, I think, the culvert replacement costs to current standards. Something that many members of the community might not know is a huge portion of that cost is something that didn't exist 20 years ago, which is offsetting wetland impact. So when you do a project to raise a roadway, you have to put slopes on the side, and those slopes mean that you're encroaching on what's currently marsh and currently wetland, and you have to pay for every square foot of that, and it's not cheap. It is a major driver of projects and funding for projects, and it's also one of the reasons wetland compensation grant would cover, because, oh, look at that. Now I can just chill right out. Huh? Reboot, Control Alt Delete. Now I'm too loud. So, good evening, everyone. So I just wanted to point out that, things, when we talk about the cost of a project 20, 30 years ago, the cost of wetland compensation was nowhere close to what it is now. So we're not talking apples and apples, and we have to account for that. That money wouldn't be covered by a grant because it wouldn't be part of road removal. That would be borne by the town. So that's, again, something that a lot of people don't know about, but that's something that we'd have to pay to Maine DEP and Army Corps. So those were the 2 points I wanted to make. The third thing I really had is a question. I wanted to just get clarification, and I think this might be for Pete, maybe. So this is sort of a true or false. So you're stuck with answering true or false. Would it be true to say that the road, as it is now, Sawyer Road, does not protect upstream areas from flooding? It is not protecting those areas.
I would say that's true.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to say and get an answer to. Thank you.
I want to make just one comment, just so people are aware, the fees that that last speaker were just talking about, that is where the funding for this project is coming from. So the state in lieu fee program, that's the Maine Natural Resource Conservation Program, the money that's being used on this project is coming from fees that were paid to offset impacts to wetlands in southern Maine.
Hello, are we on? Excuse me. I don't have any notes because I hadn't planned on speaking, just to voice my general support for this project. Kate Borduas, 11 Evergreen Farms Road, about 40 feet above sea level. So this doesn't really bite me in the butt. But I'm a master naturalist. Some of you know I'm a member of the Conservation Commission. And I have led countless bird walks and nature walks. I'm not marsh walks so much. The last place I would take birders for a walk, however beautiful and however many species, is by the side of a busy road. So the arguments that this is a beautiful place that should be, the birders should be someplace safer, and I would never take them there. So that's just personal. I liked Phineas Sprague's analogy of the three-legged stool, and I've been kind of thinking about something along those lines. I'm not if the analogy holds true, but the three things that seem to be going on here is political will. People like what they like, they have memories, they have values, and there's money. These very forceful elements for what's going on here, how to find an agreement over arguments can be made and agreements can be found, but there's a lot going on, and whatever we do, however we get from whatever pool of money, it's going to cost a lot. But then there's the third. Now, I'm not a geologist, but I do know that this world has gone in cycles. And those cycles, if we get colder, the water goes up, the water goes down. And I'm not sure about this predictive curve, but we do know that there's an acceleration. And those of us in the business would call them abiotic. It's the climate. It's what's happening with nature and weather and climate. And let me tell you, those three legs to that stool, political will, finance, and the abiotic nature. I'll put up this finger. You know what's going to be landing at the end? Even the man who has been vigorously opposed to this said, well, actually, the road will probably have to go. Let's just kick it down the road till I'm dead. Kicking it down the road is not really an option because I looked up King Canute. Sorry, but I'm going to look up King Canute because we all think he stood there and said, stop, I'm in charge. That's the political will and the money, that he's going to stop nature. Well, that's not what Canute did. He demonstrated that no matter how much money and how much political will he had, he couldn't stop nature. And so I think what really drives me and the Conservation Commission and anybody who's paying a lot of attention for the best for the most, the biggest, is basically saying, we're not going to be stopping nature. And so we can do it the easy way with plans and before things are a disaster, or we can wait 50 years and do it the hard way. So I commend everybody involved, and we can nitpick, but the big picture is that road's going. It's going to go neat and tidy, or it's going to go in one ugly mess in 50 years. So well done. Thank you. Keep it up.
Just one more quick point I'd like to make. If you're gonna try to squeeze 2 more years out of this road, it should have a year-round weight limit on it now. The water's rising, but the road's settling as well. And big dump trucks and people hauling heavy equipment are not helping, especially if we're not gonna throw any money at it between now and the time we tear it out. Thank you.
Angela, I'm just going to confirm that there's no one online that wants. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone coming this evening and your thoughtful comments and questions. And just to reiterate, there will be a formal town council process related to this, where the town council will contemplate removing the road and it has not been scheduled yet. But there proper notification following the state statute will be made. Information will be posted on the town website, on the town social media. Okay, one more question.
Don Hamill, Bay Street, Scarborough. Could you tell us the time frame that you're talking about in terms of these decisions being made? Because I was here on the council in 2022, and I remember voting in favor of this based upon the information we had at the time. And I thought this was just going to be a limited commitment that was related to the matching funds for, for the grant. But I do not recall any of this discussion about decisions that were final about building viaducts and closing the road. So maybe my memory is failing in my later years here, but could you tell us about that? Because I'm gravely concerned here that we seem to have a habit of talking to the people who are going to be affected the most at the latest possible moment. And that really grinds with me and a lot of other people.
Yeah, so it looks like it will happen within the next 2 months that the town council will take it up. I don't want to put firm dates out. Our chair is going to the podium, so I'm happy to let her speak to dates if she would like. As Angela explained earlier this evening, a lot of times if the town votes for road discontinuance, that's a binding decision. There is no going back from that. So it didn't make sense for the town to make that decision before the resources were in place to move forward. So that's why the grant was obtained first. And this is a step as part of the project, is to go through the formal road discontinuance process so that the project can move forward. And April, I will let you speak if you like.
Only if you need me to.
Go for it.
You're doing a great job. My name is April Seither. I'm currently the chair of the Scarborough Town Council. In terms of process, the council has had this on our radar It was really important for me and other members of the council, if you look around, there are many of us here this evening, to hear the public comment this evening. It is our intent to have first reading of the road closure, which is the official step that the council needs to take on October 15th, 2025. Public notice will be put in the paper per our policy. And so abutters notices will be sent, all of the typical procedure that we follow for first reading. And then we will, assuming that it makes it past first reading, we will schedule a public hearing and second reading.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. It is exactly 8 o'clock. So thank you all for joining us this evening. If anyone has questions, my contact information is on the town website. Feel free to send an email or give me a call. And thank you all for spending your Wednesday night